So today I want to talk to you guys about how educational inequity is a form of racial and class violence. And I want to do that. I have tons of evidence, and my area of scholarship is in the school to prison pipeline and in educational inequity. So I have tons of research and things to back it up, but I kind of want to present it through the lens of my experience as an educator. So my name's Heather Wellman, and I'm an educator and administrator in Pueblo, Colorado. I teach in a Title I and a turnaround school. And that's how I've always taught in schools that are both Title I and in turnaround. So I have some experience with this. And one of the things that really got me, that I think about every day when I think about educational inequity is Sonia Sotomayor said, until we get equity in education, we won't have an equal society. So I really liked what Dr. Deval said before me about love and about how it is the constant moving toward actualization. And I think that education plays a really important role in that. So I want to share with you kind of an anecdote of two educations. On my first day of teaching, I taught at Sarah Zumwalt Middle School in South Oak Cliff, Dallas, Texas. And when I came to that school, I was one of the only white people in the building, including students and faculty. There were about 5 to 6 of us. And so I worked in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And I came to school in Dallas, Texas, a school that had no air conditioning. The heat was on and off in the winter. Many times my students and I sat in parkas with gloves on teaching class. And I came in and I didn't have a projector. And so for my birthday that year, which is right near the time of the beginning of school, I asked for a projector for my birthday, and my family pushed together. And I asked for donations for my classrooms for things like pencils and paper. And I taught around 110 students. And during the course of the month, I was allotted 300 copies. So that amounts to 2 pieces of paper per student that I was allowed to copy. So my family even pitched in and helped me buy a laser printer so I could print copies for my class. My own children attended a school in Plano, Texas, which is considered one of the best schools in the entire state. And when they walked into a very similar classroom in middle school, it was in a brand new air-conditioned building. My daughter joined the track team and was given a Nike tracksuit from head to floor. When she went to her science class, she was provided with so many materials, and she was given labs and interactions and field trips. And now she's going to school and going to grow up to become a chemist and economist. And so she was given this sort of things that helped her get started. And I was experiencing just 17 miles away, a wildly different world, because funding makes the difference. So you may not know exactly how schools are funded. So 50% in the United States of America, and this is not true in every single district, and some have some different things. But if we're going to look at the whole of the United States, this is how funding happens. 50% of school funding comes from property taxes, and 50% comes from a combination of state and federal dollars. So what that means is that neighborhoods where the property taxes are higher, the schools get more money. And in neighborhoods where the property taxes are lower, schools get less money. And then they get some funding from the state and the federal government. In states like Colorado, they also have this cap on spending called the Robin Hood. And this was designed to help equal the playing field in funding. So very rich school districts have a cap on how much money they can spend per student. And then the rest of that money is taken and distributed to rural and poorer school districts. But here's how they get around that: the PTO. So PTO is a workaround for Robin Hood funding. So for example, in the state of Colorado, there's a school district that is in a ski town that is very rich. Last year, they raised just about $22 million under their PTO. In my school district, which is a larger school district and is a poor and less popular school district, we didn't raise even close to $1 million in our school district. And so the PTO helps work around those sort of Robin Hood spending caps. And so the funding remains inequitable. And this is important because it directly relates not only to to the goods and services that your students receive, like curriculum and materials, but it also directly relates to the teachers that they have. Where do teachers want to go? We know there's a national teacher shortage, and teachers want to go where they're going to be paid and where they're going to have the resources that will help them be successful in the classroom. The other thing that creates inequity between these two sort of disparate districts that we just talked about with funding is the role that alumni recommendations play in getting into top tier schools and the role that scholarships play. So when you are attending a school in a well-funded area, you have more opportunities to have those sort of alumni recommendations and alumni interviews by people who know you and your family, as opposed to just going in to be a stranger. So for example, last year, we had a student who was interviewing for Princeton. This student had to drive to Colorado Springs, which is about an hour drive from the town that I live in order to have this alumni interview with a stranger. I was fortunate enough to actually talk to the alumnus who interviewed the student. And what this interviewer had told me was all day, the interviewees came in and they had done things like gone to crazy tennis camps and done community service and had these amazing opportunities in their school for AP and IB and all of these different kinds of courses. And when the Pueblo student came, they were coming from a disadvantaged background and hadn't had the same opportunities and didn't stand out in the same way to a stranger. And so these things also continue to reinforce educational inequity. The next thing is something that's actually falling out of favor right now as a backlash in this movement, which is great. And I hope that we stay on this track, is state testing and online learning. So state testing is just inequitable. We know that the most turnaround schools happen in areas where the student population is predominantly a minority population. And this is just an indicative of the way that our education system works, and it's directly tied to funding and how all of these things work. You actually can lose funding in your district if you have failing schools. So instead of continuing to support schools in a stronger way, what we do is we take funding away when those students fail their state testing. And online learning, I really want to talk about this. I know my time is running short, but I want to discuss online learning. So as we have worked through COVID and students have been at home and parents have been homeschooling and working with their students, and teachers have been working very hard to provide online materials for students that are meaningful. And I know, because I'm a teacher and I work with teachers, that teachers have just been working hard to learn a new system and provide really meaningful education. But here's the problem. In neighborhoods where we have kids that may not have the same economic advantages, what we're talking about is a lack of access, a lack of equipment. And what that then creates is educational gaps, and it creates time that students don't have to make up those gaps, a time deficit. So in the district that I work in, we did mass Chromebook pass outs and we handed out hotspots, but we didn't have enough for students in middle school and primary school. So we had to focus on our students who were seniors, and then we kind of trickled down from there. So what we're talking about is kindergartners who are already in a disadvantaged situation, then not continuing their education and going on and creating more educational gaps. And this is the real educational inequity. And the final thing I want to touch on is policing in our schools. I just want to tell you another story because I know that we learn so well through stories. So I want to tell you about a little girl in 3rd grade. She was kind of feisty. And one day there was this other little girl, and she had gotten in an argument with a group of her friends, and they were just being catty little 3rd grade girls. So these two little girls hid behind the cafeteria spot where you picked up your tray, and they cut this girl's hair, snipped it right at the braids, walked away, waved those braids around, and said, "That'll show you." That little girl went to the principal's office and was sent home, not suspended, sent home for the day. Her parents had a strong talking to her, and it was kind of an interesting experience. That little girl was me. 2 years ago, I had 2 little 5th grade girls who were in a fight with another of their 5th grade girls, and they hid behind some bookcases in the library. In order to teach this girl a lesson, they pulled, not cut, pulled her braids. And this girl cried and was upset, as she should be. These 2 little 5th grade girls were ticketed and then had to go into the court system and serve 100 hours of community service or pay a $2,000 fine in our community. And these are the difference between what happens when you're a white girl in a school and when you are a not white child in a school that has a heavy police presence. And so we, as part of our movement, have to talk about how we fund police and we don't fund education. In the town that I live in, our school system pays $650,000 a year to keep an SRO in our schools from elementary to high school, but we don't have enough money to buy a new curriculum to help support our most disadvantaged students. And so these are just the ways that educational inequity continues to impact all communities, and especially our communities of color. And we really have to be the ones to start speaking up about equitable funding and equitable distribution of goods and services to students. And we have to talk about removing police from our schools.